we'll need to first of all delete everything that we have in our file. So I'll hit A, X, delete. Then we're going to add a sphere, so I'll hit Shift A and we'll go to Mesh and I'll choose UV sphere. Then I'll go to the sphere settings on the bottom left. Then I'll increase these segments. So I'll make them, let's say, 90. And then for the rings, I could go to, let's say, 70. The reason I'm using such a high number is because I want to avoid any like pinching at the top if we use a low number of segments and rings. So using a high number will help us mitigate that. And then for the radius, I'm going to want this to be in real life scale. So the real life size of a lollipop is 0.0127 meters. It's going to be like really small. Then on the numerical keypad, I can click on the numpad to zoom in. Then I can select this sphere, right click, shade smooth. Then we can create the stick for the lollipop. So I can tab in and we can create the stick quite easily. We can extract an edge from here, or we can just use a cylinder, but I think I'll extract an edge. So before I extract that edge, you'll notice if I zoom in, there's some weird result that we're getting. So we'll need to get rid of this, or rather to fix it. So on this right hand side, we have item tool and we have view. So go to view and under view, adjust the clip start. So I'll just reduce it to the minimum, which is 0.001 meters. Then I want to select these faces here. So I will hit 3 on the keyboard. Then I'll click off. Then I'll click and drag to select these faces. Then I can switch my view to, let's say, the front view. See if this is enough. Probably not. So I need to add on to this selection. So I can hit 3, hold down Alt Shift and click on one of these faces so that it kind of adds to our selection. Then I can switch to front again, and then I can hit Z and I'll choose wireframe. Then I'll hit E to extrude. Then I'll drag this up, right? Then I will hit S, Z, 0 and enter so that I flatten this. Then I can move it further up, so GZ. So here we have like a really huge face, as you can see. So what I can do is I can hit Ctrl R to add a few edge loops like so. So I've added 3. So if I undo this, so Ctrl R, and then you'll see if you hover over any of these faces, you'll see that you get an edge loop. But of course, this is just a hypothetical one because I'm yet to accept it. So I can hit I can adjust my middle mouse, the scroll wheel, to increase the edge loops. So if I drag up, I'm increasing the edge loops. I drag down, I'm reducing the edge loops. So I just want to add, let's say 3 or 4, maybe let's say 4. Then I can click to accept. So you can double click to accept. Then of course you'll have your settings where you can come in and increase the number of cuts. So you still have that freedom even after you click and accept. So 4 is fine for me. Then I want this edge loop here. So I'll select this edge. So I'm in edge mode. So I'll select this edge, click Alt, and then click that edge so that it selects the edge loop. Then what I want to do is I want to duplicate this edge loop. So I'll hit Shift D to duplicate, then click to accept. Then I will click on my spacebar to search. So I'll search for separate. Then I'll choose separate by selection. Once I choose separate by selection, on the top right here where we have the collections, you'll see we have the sphere, and then we have sphere.001. Sphere.001 is the edge loop. Currently, we're still in the spheres. You can see with this small square with another small square that is highlighted. So we're still in edit mode. So I can exit edit mode. So I can tab out. Then I can go to the front view. So I've hit my tilde key. Then I'll hit Z, wireframe. Then I'll select this sphere.001. Then I'll move it up. So G, Z, right? Like so. Then I'll tab in. I'll hit 2. 2 is for edges. Then I'll hit A, so it selects all the edges. Then I'll hit E to extrude. Then I'll move this down. Then I'll hit Z to kind of accept that, or rather to move it on the Z axis, not to accept, but to move it on the Z axis. Then of course with this selected, I can continue just hitting G to move. I'm just zooming out because I want to see how long I want this to be. So G, Z, so maybe that point, right? So then I know this is very like high resolution, which is unnecessary, but like I said, you can create a like the stick for the lollipop using a cylinder. So I feel like this is not, I don't think this is necessary to have this high of a resolution. So let's just use a cylinder. So I've just deleted that. So I'll hit Shift A, and then we'll go to mesh, and I'll use a cylinder. And for this, I'll reduce the radius, something smaller, maybe 0.002. Maybe lower than that. So I'll hit Shift so that I go to a lower value. But then once it gets to 0.001, kind of stops. So I'll just increase it a bit. Then I'll use the front view. Hit Z, wireframe. Then I can now reduce the value. But you don't have to do it here. You can actually just go to edit mode and do it. So let me reduce the vertices. So that is a bit much. Let's do, let's say, 16. Then the depth is again a lot, so let's do that. Then I'll move it, so GZ, right? It's still quite large, as you can see, compared to this extrusion that I created. So we can hit the tab key. I'll hit A to select everything, then S to scale, and it's scaling in a strange way. So I'll hit S. You can see it's scaling from the center of the object. So with this, you'll have to kind of zoom out so that you can see what's happening. So I'll hit S, zoom out, then S again, then G, then Z, move this up, then S, then GZ. Okay, so something like that. Then I can hit S again actually. So I'm not choosing a particular axis where I should scale this on. I want all the axes to be considered, the X, the Y, and the Z. So I'm not specifying, is it the X, is it the Y, is it the Z? It's in all axes. Then I'll hit Z, solid. Then we have this, right? So if you wanted to have a hole, we can delete this face. So I can hit the backslash to isolate. Go to 3, select this face, come to the top here, hit Shift, select that, X, delete faces. And then for this, we'll have to use the solidify, of course. So before I do that, we can add a few edge loops. So Control R, then I'll just add a few. And again, we still have the option to add as we like, right? So I'm adding them just to have the structure maintain itself if I choose to smooth this particular object. So I'll tab out, I'll right click, shade smooth, then I'll click on the backslash to exit isolation. Then I'm going to go to the modifiers, and I will add under generate, we can add a solidify, and it's quite large, so I'll reduce the thickness. So I'll hold down Shift and drag. So let me start with 0.002. It's also quite large, so let's do 0.0002. So this works fine. So let's do 0.0025. 0.000025. Yeah, so there are 3 zeros. And then of course this looks a bit of a mess. So shade smooth. So I can tab in. Then I can add an edge loop here. So Control R, click and drag up to that point. And if I tab out, it stops looking strange in a way. I can go into isolation mode and do the same for the other side. Although we're not going to see it, I'm just going to do the same. So Control R, click and drag, right? Then I can exit isolation. Then we can actually add a shade smooth, or rather subdivision surface, because we're already using shade smooth. So I'll add a subdivision surface and I'll lower the resolution both in the viewport and the render to 1 and 1. And that's fine. Then I'll go back to this sphere. Then I'll tab into it. Then we'll go to the front view. So I want to create that area that kind of extrudes a bit from this section. So I'll hit Z, wireframe. Then I'll hit 3. Then I will click and drag, select the faces that I need. So I'll hold on Shift right now to add to my selection. Okay. Then I can hit Z, solid. Then I'm going to extrude this. So I'll hit Alt E. When you hit Alt E, you'll get the extrude settings. So I'll choose extrude faces along normals. So I'll click on that, then I'll drag slightly. Then once I'm satisfied, I'll click to accept. Remember, if you want to make a subtle change, hold down Shift. Then I want to scale this a bit. I want to squish it a bit, so I'll hit SZ and just scale it down a bit. So I'll hit Shift and just make a slight change, something like that. Then I'll tab out. Then of course with this you can add a subdivision surface. So if you go to the modifiers, you can add a subdivision surface just to make it look a bit better. Then I'll lower the levels in the viewport and in the render to 1 and 1, right? So if I tab in, and actually I can deactivate this in edit mode, the subdivision surface. So click on this icon, and then you can choose to add edge loops, for example. So if you wanted this to be a bit harder, you can add edge loops to it or bevel the edge loop. So that's something you can do, but I'm not going to do it. I think this is fine. It's a simple object. I don't want to overthink it. Then of course, finally, you need to rename your objects. So this is the stick, and this is the lollipop. Okay. So now that we have this, the asset is complete, I'd say. Maybe the final thing we could do is organize, probably. So I'll hit Shift A, and then we'll add an empty, and I'll add a plain axis. And I'll come to the left-hand side, bottom left, and I'll reduce the radius, so something small, like so. Then I will select this stick, hold on Shift, select the lollipop. Then I will switch to the front view. Then I'll hit GZ, this up, thereabout. Okay, so again GZ, move it. Then I want to parent the lollipop and the stick to this particular empty. So I'll select the lollipop, select the stick. So I'm holding now Shift. Then finally, I'll select the empty, and then Control P to parent. Then I'll choose Object, Keep Transform. Now click on that. Then we have the parenting happening. So now I just need to select the empty, hit G, and I can move it, right? So then I'll rename this empty to maybe lollipop asset, and there we have our lollipop.